Okay, we are live with another stream, and as usual, I feel like I say this every time, but it's been a while.
Because it has been a while, I
It seems
guess.
like we usually go for once a month at least, or something like that.
Then I guess it's a pretty regular time then.
Yeah, gonna have to think up a new intro. So this isn't really a set stream about anything too particular, but we have a couple things that we can go over. The first happened today, and it's not really important because it's something that was expressed via Twitter, which is one of the worst places for any kind of conversation ever. But my real problem with social media, I guess in general, is you have all these people that want to talk about these topics as though they are an authority figure on said topics, and then you say anything that goes against what they're saying, or even partially agree with what they're saying, but still say, okay, well, you have a point, but
I have some differences of opinion in these areas.
right. And it's like instantly they don't want to talk to you, or they want to call you an idiot, or they want to block you. And I fail to see if they're truly genuine about wanting to change things, how it is that you can just shut down anybody that doesn't see things your way. Because if you're trying to work against what you consider to be the status quo, you're going to have to deal with the people that don't agree with you and sway them over to your side in order to make any kind of real change. And that's why I'm really of the opinion that most of the people that do this don't actually care about what they're talking about. They care about the social capital that it gives them, the pats on the back that they get for it, the you're so right, you're so progressive, you're ahead of the curve, it's 2017 and you see things the right way.
The white way.
Okay, well, let me see if I can just do a screen share to give you just an idea of what it is that we're bouncing off of here. Application window. Yes, we want to share this. Okay. Share with everybody would be useful. Okay, so anybody that follows me on Twitter probably already saw this post, but the woman in question that posted this was a writer or a contributor to The Guardian. So I don't know if she was actually paid. She might just be somebody that does opinion pieces or something.
She might be paid, but she's not a regular. She's not on their payroll.
Right. I kind of felt like trying to do one of those anonymous opinion pieces just to troll them and see if I could get published. I feel like I know enough of their talking points to trick them into doing it, and I think it'd be hilarious. I might give it a shot at some point.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be the first time. I think somebody else has managed to do that to them. And
yeah, it's happened a couple of times on different websites, if I recall correctly. I'm pretty sure it's happened on The Guardian before, definitely, though. So this woman put out this tweet. If you missed the horror show yesterday, I put a moment on hashtag sex for rent together. I didn't even know this was a hashtag. And in fact, I didn't even look at the tag. I'm kind of curious if there are any other posts on it, or she just kind of pulled this out of nowhere, because I didn't even know this was a thing, really. But I've been on Craigslist before. I've looked at all the stupid posts, and
I believe there was a stream or something where we actually looked at Craigslist posts.
We might have. And there are some questionable ads when it comes to housing and stuff. But the one that she posted in particular here, I don't even know if this was from Craigslist. I guess UK has Craigslist. But as you can see from the title, it says "Big Bum Black Girl Wanted by a Naughty Landlord. Free accommodation offered." So, basically it's wanting sexual acts for so-called free housing, which, obviously it's not free. You're paying a service in some sense. I'm not,
Freedom isn't free.
Yeah, I'm not going to read all through our back and forth, because you could just go see that on Twitter. But it's interesting to me just how people like this act as though men, it says men preying on vulnerable women, offering a roof for sex. Now, of course, in a sense, it is kind of preying on women, you could say, but nobody is forced into doing this. It's an ad. If you respond to it, that's on you for replying. Now, I don't think that these things should be going on, but if it's not against the terms of service of the website, there's really not too much you can do about it. And it might be, it just could be that people don't report it.
Which then is that's another situation in and of itself.
Right. There's a lot of weird fetishy stuff on Craigslist and things like that. So it's nothing I haven't seen before. It just blows my mind that she seems to think that vulnerable women can't say no to something like this or have no other option but to do this for housing. Now, you can be in a difficult situation, but that doesn't mean you have to completely abandon all of your morals just to get through. Obviously, I'm not going to pretend that people in bad situations don't sometimes fall into doing the wrong thing to try to get themselves out of it and just end up in a worse mess than they already were in, which I would kind of argue that if you are against having sex for a place to stay, you're putting yourself in a worse situation than just being kind of homeless. Because there are other places you can go. And as when we discussed this earlier, you pulled up a shelter in 2 seconds. So it's not like these places don't exist in the area where this woman is talking about.
But rather than even responding to that, which I think is the most frustrating part, is that when you bring a counter argument, rather than actually addressing the argument, because there was a problem that I identified in one of the shelters that I saw where it's basically there's no walk-ins allowed. There's so much traffic there that you basically have to set an appointment more or less to meet with the people at the shelter before you can ever get there. But rather than doing that, they just jump on the side of incredulity, like that, not even acknowledging that it's not a real option. They're just like, they just act like you didn't say anything.
Well, it's not on this screenshot, but she retweeted one of those things I said where a woman doesn't have to be a sex toy if they don't want to. And she had the nerve to say that was myopic or however.
Yeah, myopic.
Yeah. So that to me is kind of hilarious, because how is it short-sighted to claim that people have the ability to choose for themselves? And then it's kind of a multifaceted discussion, because she was also claiming that under vulnerable women, which was, as I said, undefined somewhere along here,
but I guess it was supposed to be like caregivers and women in abusive relationships and
right. And she
like
also
that.
mentioned undocumented women, to which I said that, that was illegal and they shouldn't be in the country anyway if that was the case. And then she retweets that with the quote tweet, of course, and says like, oh, that, that's what you're about, as though it's some kind of gotcha.
He sure figured me out.
It's like, yeah, how terrible. But of course, it ended in a block, and I ended up just kind of toying with her because they don't want to admit that maybe they don't have their argument fully thought out, and it's more just trying to get a reaction from people by saying, oh, these poor women are vulnerable, they need help. It's like, yeah, maybe some of them do, and there are places available, and maybe it's not perfect, but you can't just act like there's no choice in any of these matters. And why is it that you're the person that gets to determine, how much of the choices that are being made is vulnerability versus just personal choice? Because there are some people that, unfortunately, while I disagree with it, willingly take part in these things and get something out of it. I guess they get their free housing.
Yeah, and then you can argue that they consider themselves to be sex workers, and I thought you it was taboo to criticize that.
Yeah, that does seem to be the case. My, I guess it's me just being an ass, but I thought it was funny because she was like, "Have you been a woman in crisis?" And I just couldn't resist because they make a joke out of like identity and stuff. So I had to tell her that I identified as a woman last week, and I was finally able to get the help I needed. Which it's kind of funny. It's like I feel like I should do one of those social experiments or something and see how far you could take it. Because
It, so far, so a few people have bought into it. The whole like, well, how would you appreciate somebody telling you as a non-binary person, blah blah blah.
oh, I should probably try to find that exchange because that was really funny. I put in my bio that I am NBGI, which equals non-binary gender individual, and that's just some stupid initialism that I made up on a whim. It doesn't actually exist. It might on Tumblr somewhere, but I've never seen it. And I put the hashtag anything but cis and ask me about my pronouns. You wouldn't think that anybody would take this seriously. You think they would look at it and think, "Oh, this guy's messing with us." But no, there was a discussion where I'll try to scroll down to it, where somebody actually said, because we were talking about race related things, I believe, because they were talking about the United flight situation and how this makeup tutorial, some girl who happened to be white, we have to mention that, of course, because it was mentioned in here. She did a makeup tutorial mocking the United situation. She wasn't mocking the man. She was making fun of the fact that United, was violent with their customers. But this stupid Tumblr account, Twitter account, decided to get all pissy about it being an East and Southeast Asian beauty Twitter account, whatever that is.
Nothing basically.
Yeah, pretty much. I'm actually curious if the person is even Asian. We'll never know because they didn't post photos of themselves. So they got mad, and I don't care that it's satire, and violence against Asian bodies is never something for white women to find comedy in, which again is missing the point. It's the man's not the butt of the joke, the airline is. But I hate it when they say things, they complain about things like dehumanization, and then they have the nerve to use terminology like Asian bodies or black bodies or brown bodies. It's like it doesn't sound any more inhuman than that.
Yeah, I mean, reducing people to a color basically. Which color call me crazy. I thought there was more to my being than just that, but I guess not.
No, it's really that's really all it's about, I guess. So, okay, here's the part. They're just like, "Do you want me to start talking about what it's like to be non-binary even though I'm cis? Do you want me to talk about your own lived experiences? Do you want me to act like I know better about non-binary issues even though I'm cis?" And so I didn't mess with them. I was just like, "Yes, if you have an opinion on that, you're welcome to it. We're all human beings and shouldn't segregate by race, gender, and sex." And then I said, "Because that is not equality. That is the very thing social activists fought against during the civil rights movement." And the response I got was, "I'm about to block you because you won't leave my mentions. Goodbye."
The funniest part to me is when they are challenging you, and when you give an answer that isn't what they want, they just tell you, "Oh, get out of my mentions." You can just not reply.
Or "Don't at me." It's like, what do you mean, "don't at you"? I mean, first of all, you can't tell somebody else what to do on a public platform if your profile is not privated. And Second, you started the conversation. You put these talking points out there. What did you put them out there for? And I already have the answer to this, but it's like, what do you put them out there for if you don't expect anybody to respond, or the only response you expect is agreement, which is what they do expect. They expect agreement, or they expect, just a stupid, disingenuous pat on the back for their opinions, which does nothing, because at that point you're basically just preaching to the choir.
But it makes them feel better, which does nothing in the long run. But
Hey, we're joined by Mind Out of Sync. I find your video to be really outdated and boring. What does that mean? What is outdated? Is it Google Hangouts? Is Google Hangouts outdated for you? Don't worry, Google Hangouts is being destroyed soon.
I can't find any more outdated of an opinion than I hate the Bible. Let's destroy everything religious because my family doesn't like me. So I guess that makes 3 of us.
Have you burned any of those lately, by the way? I mean, you do realize that the age of something doesn't really determine its value, right?
Yes, it does, because a good example is that no video games before 2015 are progressive or good. So,
oh, right.
I remember many years ago when I was trying to date around, and there was a person, and she asked me what kind of, or I asked her what kind of games she likes, because she said she played a lot, and she talked like Halo and Call of Duty and all of that, and I said what I like, and she just dismissed them as old, so they weren't relevant. Of course, they were nowhere near the caliber of what was out at the time, Halo 3, and I don't remember which Call of Duty was out back then, but it doesn't compare to those classics.
It's Modern Warfare or something. I don't know how popular Call of Duty really is anymore. I know they keep doing the yearly update thing, but I don't know what is the new go-to.
I don't know. It sells like gasoline anyway, or petrol if you are not in the US. So who knows?
Well, that's enough of these stupid tweets here.
It's a bit of a redundant term.
Yeah,
stupid and tweets are pretty much implied at this point.
You're still using the anti-SJW train. Well, that's nice and all, but I'm actually not anti-SJW, so I don't know what you're talking about. Do you like having labels attributed to you that you don't identify with?
Do I?
No, this our friend here in the chat.
Oh.
I'm anti-SJW, even though I've never said that ever. Well, I don't even use the term SJW. The only time that I've ever used the term is when somebody has identified themselves in that way, which, oddly enough, some people think that term is a good thing.
Yes, and despite it being a pejorative, you'll have some people say, "Oh, I'm proudly an SJW," and I'm like, okay. Like that reminds me of we saw some place going somewhere for an Easter dinner, and the name of one of the places we saw, it was a local food mart, but the name of it, I'm pretty sure it was a South Asian kind of mom and pop grocery store. And so the name of it, I looked at it, I said, that doesn't really sound like a really appropriate name, because my understanding is that the name of it couldn't be considered a racial slur for people who are not that of that race. So to me, that would be like a black person having something, I have a store called the Nigga Food Mart or something like that. This doesn't really sound like that's something that a lot of people would want to patronize. But
so there's this local store, and I made a joke about this because it has the highlighted the light up sign, but some of the lights are out on the name, and
Mm-hmm.
it's the store's name is Hannaford, and I think like the H is missing, and then the R and the D are they're both turned off, so it says like Anafo, and I was just thinking that it sounds basically like the the hood version of what that store would be called.
The whichever part that uses the silent H. Actually, that probably does. Yeah, Anafo,
Yeah.
Anafo. Yeah,
So the response I got was no, but I keep being called an SJW for even daring to have a different opinion. Okay, that that may be true. I did see some people doing that in your comment section, but I've never done that. So, and the people that have done that aren't anybody I'm associated with. So that's not really. I don't really see how that is
but
relevant.
but you have to understand. I mean, you have to understand that the people that proudly call themselves anti SJW, just like those that proudly call themselves SJW, they're going to do that. They're just going to say, "Oh, you have an opinion that's contrary to what I
Right.
like, therefore you're this."
I mean, I feel like I've said this multiple times, but it's those two groups are basically just they've basically boiled down to being opposite sides of the same coin. And yeah, it's a generalization, but if you need to fall into a group to have your opinion validated, eventually it seems like it comes to a point where you just get to that extreme where anybody that is slightly different than what you're saying, it's like you just label them as the opposition, and that's where the conversation ends, or it just becomes a war of throwing labels back and forth on people.
Right, until one person blocks another person. It's a
And that's
vicious
why I really
cycle.
stay out of it. I mean, yeah, okay, I probably have some opinions that align with people that consider themselves anti SJW, but I don't think that automatically makes one part of the group, because there are also many things that they say that I don't really agree with.
And I certainly don't. I mean, I know it's kind of in vogue now to go after certain anti SJW YouTubers now, but I remember making an unpopular video a few months ago that went after them, back before when it wasn't cool, and getting all kinds of lame excuses as to why it's not acceptable to have that opinion, and some nonsense about saying things and not how they were meant to be used or something. I don't remember.
Yeah,
They were very ham-fisted excuses.
they kind of have figureheads, and then after a while it's like the figureheads do something that annoys them, and then the tides turn and they prop somebody else up and start to put down the other ones. And it seems like it happens when one of these so-called figureheads gets called out for something by someone that has another decent sized following, and then people kind of sway over to that person's channel and they're like, oh, this person, they're right, they're so right. But it's like you could say that and be a nobody, and people will look at you and be like, oh, well, you're just doing this for views, you're just jealous. Stupid throwaway comments that don't really mean anything, because they don't have anything other than they enjoy this person's content and that's why they want to defend them. And that's fine, but I wish people would just admit that, rather than saying like, well, you're just wrong for reasons I can't define, or you're just wrong because you want their popularity and you're mad that you don't have it or something.
Right. You can't have it both ways. I guess you can, but you have to call yourself what, heteroflexible or something.
I just don't like the idea of communities based on opinions. Like, yes, yeah, some of these guys, they're friends that, well, I guess online friends at the very least, and they hang out in each other's streams and stuff. But even then, I don't feel like going into a stream should be enough to make another person guilty of being part of a certain community or something, where they automatically agree with everything that's being said. It's like that a couple of accusations I've seen. One of the YouTubers Roaming Millennial. She has different people on her streams just to have discussions, and she had some people with some pretty stupid opinions on there. But I think it's dumb when they're like, well, you let them on your channel, so clearly that means you agree with them. It's like, well, not really. I mean, have you ever been in an argument before? Have you ever been part of a conversation before where you spoke to someone and you didn't agree with everything they said? Because I feel like that's just normal conversation. I even in real life, I don't find myself in conversations about important topics where I'm 100% in agreement with what the person in front of me is saying. I mean, even if you get to the point where that's the discussion, you really don't have much to bounce off of each other because you're just kind of saying the same thing back and forth. I feel like what helps the discussion go along is when you have someone that, all right, maybe they see some things your way and maybe they see some other things not your way, and you can exchange those ideas and kind of either come to a middle ground, or somebody can be like, oh, you know what, you made a good point, maybe I should adjust my view. But now it's just like, well, oh, you said this, well, you're a social justice warrior. You said this, okay, well, you're an anti-SJW.
You're a bigot, you know, sexist, racist, transphobic, homophobic, etc., etc.
And I just feel like those words are, to me, those words are just basically joke words anymore.
Yeah, they don't really carry a meaning.
Yeah, because it's like the whole Nazi thing. It's just gotten to the point where, you know, like in the 80s movies and stuff, it was like, you know, beating, or yeah, I guess it would be Indiana Jones was in the 80s, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like it was cool to be fighting against Nazis, but now it's like everyone's a Nazi. Even trash cans are Nazis at this point. So it's not cool when it's like everybody's being called a Nazi just because they have a differing opinion.
Yeah, I mean, at least back in the day, they used to just call you a dumb Republican or something like that.
I mean, I'm even tired of the whole like, oh, those conservatives, and it doesn't really do anything because, and I guess this is just a problem with like American politics in general, where it's like, okay, Democrat or Republican, you know, pick your poison, and then the person labels themselves in that way, but it doesn't mean that they are the personification of everything that the term Republican means. They might hold majority views that align with it, but then they could disagree with some of the policies. It's just that more often than not, they have the views that align with that ideology. It's like there's no room, there's no middle ground, there's no room for any nuance in these topics. It's always like, well, liberal, conservative, we're done here. And I it's okay to make jokes about that, but I think when you seriously start to generalize in that way, that's when it becomes a problem. Because you just make assumptions based on a word rather than talking to the person and seeing what they're really about. And obviously there are a bunch of people that, you know, that do fit the stereotype if you talk to them, but it's not everybody.
And now it feels like it's just gotten to the point where it's hard to ever have any kind of conversation like that, because it's just better to just demonize everybody that doesn't agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, it's what drives me nuts about all these stupid social media discussions, because like I said, the people you would want to reach, if you truly believe that you want things to change, the people that you would want to reach and sway over to your side are the people that disagree with you, because you want them to see things your way so that society can go in the direction that you believe it should go in. And, you know, whether or not that's the way society should actually go aside, that would be the purpose of posturing about your political opinions, because you're actually trying to change minds rather than just looking for a crowd to cheer you on. Fighting Nazis isn't going to get you anywhere if the Nazis don't change their mind.
Yeah, well,
and I really feel like when it comes to the whole like, oh, you know, racists should lose their job, sexists should lose their job, blah, blah, blah. I don't think that really helps anything. They want to go out of their way to destroy these people's lives. And yeah, they have bullshit opinions and they're wrong about a lot of things, but if you go out of your way to destroy their life, all that's going to do is, radicalize them and maybe push them, cause them to dig their heels in the ground, so to speak. I don't want to say radicalize like they're going to blow up a school or something crazy like that, although I'm sure there are some sick individuals that may do something like that.
But they probably feel that their opinion, that vindicates their opinion, because then they'll say, well, see, people are just trying to appease these inferior beings and they can't deal with the criticism, or
Right, can't handle the truth and things like that.
yeah, other such nonsense.
I mean, really, what I think the best thing for these people to do is to be exposed to as many different types of people as possible, because once they meet that one person that doesn't fit the stereotype, they're going to have a hard time, reconciling their beliefs with the reality in front of them. And there are some people that are never going to see the truth, but there are also people that will think, wow, maybe I was wrong about these people. Maybe they're not all that bad. And maybe sometimes I generalize things and don't really think it through, because here's this person in front of me that, they don't fit anything that this stereotype says. It's kind of like with the very extreme MGTOW people that are like, well, women are all terrible and stuff like that. It seems like a lot of the times it just takes that one woman that doesn't fit that. And I guess now we have an example, I suppose, but it just takes that one person to show them that they're wrong, and that, not everybody that you can lump into a group is the same.
Or we can just punch Nazis.
Right, because that does a lot. And speaking of punching Nazis, has everybody heard about the Moldy Locks controversy? I'm sure they have. So I don't really know the whole story, but I think there was a free speech rally at Berkeley, of all places.
If you can imagine that.
Right. I'm not even sure. I'm not really sure what the purpose of these rally things are anymore. To be honest, I don't see the point in them, but I understand the sentiments behind them. So these people were told, if they want to have this rally, they can, but they were given guidelines, and the guidelines stated that, they weren't able to bring any weapons or anything like that. But then the Antifa people showed up, and I guess they brought all kinds of weapons. I saw videos with bottles being thrown, explosives, bricks. There's a lot of crazy stuff. And this one girl who is apparently I've seen her described as a hairy vagina porn star, which I didn't realize that was a thing, but apparently it is. Kind of sad to know it is. She's like 5'1", 98 pounds, according to the profile. And she got, right, so one of the comments, kind of hypocritical how most stories are sympathizing for her when she came in looking to bring back Nazi scalps. Right, so that's what she said on social media. She said something about she was going out there to bring back at least 100 Nazi scalps. So she goes out there, and I heard she was throwing bottles and things like that. And she gets punched in the face by this guy. I think his name was Nathan something. I don't really know his background, but I heard he might be part of a questionable group. I mean, somebody in the chat might know, but I'm not going to go ahead and label him because I don't know exactly what he is. But anyway, he decked her. If you see the video, it's kind of brutal. You can actually hear the punch,
No.
which is impressive because of the amount of noise going on in the video.
Brutal,
But I
killer instinct caliber.
Yeah. It's like a Street Fighter knockout, Mike Tyson versus a year or something.
I think it's M Bison is the term.
Oh, there we go. I wouldn't want to get sued for likeness rights or something. But yeah, a lot of people are trying to sympathize with this woman and saying, oh, well, he's a man, he shouldn't hit a woman and things like that. But here's the thing, like, if that's what you're gonna go for, it's like it's a serious double standard if you are buying into the feminist equality narrative where, like, okay, women are equal to men, everything for men and women is 100% equal across the board. It's like, well, if that's your attitude, then you got to take the bad and the good. You can't just be selective, because then it's not equality, it's special treatment. And if if you're somebody of the, okay, apparently that Nathan guy was a part of some white nationalist group, which I think is what I said last night, but
He had the stupid haircut for it, so
there we go. He had the makings of a white nationalist. But yeah, if if you're going for the equality thing, it's like you can't be selective about it. If she's going to go out there and be violent, really the only thing that's going to happen is you should expect to be hit back if you're going to be hitting people. It doesn't matter what you are. If you're out there creating violent situations, somebody's going to retaliate, and the fact that you have a vagina isn't going to protect you. Whether or not you think that it's morally okay to do, which, to be honest, it's like I wouldn't want to hit a woman, but if she's attacking me or she has a weapon or something like that, you got to do what you got to do to protect yourself.
yeah, if I remember correctly, they were both kind of going towards each other. So
Yeah. And you can't be like, well, oh, how could you hit a lady? It's like, well, the term lady implies a specific type of behavior, which she clearly wasn't displaying. So that doesn't really apply here. If you want to be treated like a lady, then you need to act like the label dictates. And I realize that that's very misogynist of me to say, but I mean, that's just the way it is.
it'll be all right though. We'll manage.
So the
Or I'll
guy
manage.
was Nathan Dimago, a former Marine corporal and the founder of a white nationalist organization. He's the leader of Identity Europa, a white nationalist group. Lovely.
Identity, huh?
So it's like the worst of the worst smacking each other around. Like that's one of those fights where I wouldn't mind a double KO.
Yeah, I don't even like the term white nationalist, and I'm sure I've mentioned why before, because one, there's not a nation called white. There's not a nation of white. And two, uh the it always felt like it was a politically correct way of saying white supremacist or racist. Like if you don't like when the SJW say something politically correct, then you can't go around saying that you're that too. And to be fair, there are some of those idiots out there who are like, I'm flat out racist, but those are mostly losers on YouTube comments complaining because they've had a grand total of 2 interactions with a black person and they think that somehow accounts for millions of people.
That is always so interesting to me when I see that, because then I always question them, like, well, how many bad experiences have you had with people of your own race? It's like, why don't you apply that reasoning equally? Why is it that when it's somebody that looks different than you, it's everybody's fault on that side, but you deal with dickheads that look like, I hate saying it like that, but you deal with dickheads that look like you day in and day out, but for some reason you're not hating your own people or something.
Well, I mean, I'm the part of that is kind of the whole. That's why I say sometimes to with the social justice warriors say there's some merit to what they say. It's the fact that they don't understand the nuance well enough to know that they aren't helping the issue, they're making it worse. And one of those things is that if you were raised in a Western education system, then you are going to, I mean, and this isn't necessarily saying it's just bad. It's just saying if you're in a society that is heavily influenced or in a Western European society, it's going to have a Western European centric viewpoint of things. And of course, they're going to know more about what was happening in their own neighborhood than they're going to know in the rest of the world. So
Right.
they can grow up hearing that, oh yes, look at what all of these brilliant white people have done. And the only evidence they have that those other people weren't is they can say, well, we never heard of anything they did, so clearly they didn't do anything.
Right. I mean, I hate that. I hate that. I just hate that people fall back on racial stuff to just be like, oh, well, my people accomplished this. Yeah, but it's like, yeah, you sure, but you had no part in that. So why does it even matter? Why do you point to that as though it's your own accomplishment?
Yeah, they'll say things like, "Oh, well, look at the things that we invented." Yes, you invented something that was arbitrary. It's not like it's not like any of the sciences or math they existed before, and the observations have always been there, but it's not like the concept and the foundation behind those things existed. The philosophical pieces of them are arbitrary. That it's all based on, in the case of math, it's all based on logic, or that's the foundational piece. So logic is just an arbitrary viewpoint or perspective on in philosophy. So it's not like it's not like you're patting yourself on the back for discovering something that fits within the rules of something that you created.
Right. And I don't like the nationalism stuff and the
Oh,
racial.
I'd also like to add that they have so much pride about this stuff, but they can barely even pass their biology exams, and they're busy trying to beat their chest about how great the white nation is, and yeah, they can't even tell me what a Cauchy sequence is. So I don't really understand why you're going to take pride in something that you don't understand, but this wouldn't be the first time I've seen that happen.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of that. People do that at their lowest when they have nothing going on for themselves. Yeah, I mean that definitely seems to be the way that it goes. It's like if you can't find something in your own life that you've accomplished, you kind of look elsewhere for something that you can latch onto. And I really think that's a big problem because it's the easy way out instead of doing the legwork and trying to pave your own path. You kind of just fall back on stuff that be like, well, my people did this, and so therefore I'm part of this group that is something great, no matter how long ago in the past it was. And as I was saying, I don't really like any of that tribalism type stuff or the white nationalism, but I also do admit that as much as I don't like the racist talking points and stuff, I do have to admit that I don't like that there is that double standard where depending on what color you are, it's okay to be proud of that, or it's okay to want a place or a group
I
to yourself.
I don't think that's completely true. And the reason I'll say that is because I happen to live in a city where they love self-deprecation. Everybody loves to complain about being from here. They love to complain about how there's no lack of culture. And when they say things like that, they are saying it within the context of, for example, you can go to places in New York State or in the
Sure.
Midwest, and you can have Polish festivals or Irish festivals, or you can have Scottish festivals. And to
Oh
them,
yeah,
they appreciate that, and that's culture. And those are people that are proud of their heritage, but it's an actual nationality. And unlike what, well, like
right.
what does
Not
that
just
mean?
it's not just saying white or black. It's actually a specific group.
Right. And so they will take it, the same people that are so pro social justice will definitely use that as an excuse to say, well, I had to leave this place because they don't have any culture. And look, we can go to the Polish festival this week, or we can go to this festival, or whatever. So it seems that it's okay if it's a white person that's proud of a specific nationality that they have. If they have German ancestry or Italian ancestry, it's okay.
Well,
The
I
minute,
think I think it depends on, the context of it and who you're talking to. Like, obviously, there are people that are okay with it on either side, but the more extreme people that are just like, well, they use the general term white, and they say white people have no culture, and they say that, any pride in whiteness, as they call it, which is just, again, it's a simplification, oversimplification, is an automatically racist view, because, and I realize that may not even be the majority view, but that was what I was referring to. But I do think that you're right. There are instances where that's okay. Like, I remember the Oktoberfests and things like that. So it does kind of go both ways. But as far as like wanting,
well, I mean, I think the big difference here is that those festivals, and when people are proud of heritage like that, they represent it by things like preparing food that is representative of their culture, talking
yeah,
about.
and you can take pride in your ability to cook. You may not have invented the dishes, but if you can make it well, then that's an accomplishment. So I think that's
Right,
something that
there's
you take pride in, because it's something that you physically do.
right, when the white nationalists talk, they just say, well, our European heritage. Okay, well, you mean Western European? Do you mean Eastern European? Probably not, because if you start adding in Eastern European, you're going to have some things that you're not going to like, and you're not going to want to incorporate that into your heritage, or what you want to claim awareness to. And I think that's the problem. Those people, when they talk about pride, they're not demonstrating it with anything. They're just
It's
saying, "Oh,
not
well,
really well
we did
defined.
a lot." It's like, well, you didn't do anything.
Right. That's my biggest problem with it. It's like, you haven't done anything. You're just speaking from this pedestal that you haven't really built yourself. You're just kind of standing on the dead bodies of your ancestors to prop yourself up, and say, "Hey, I'm worth something." But what have you done to show that you're worth something?
Right, and they don't understand the nuances, and they won't accept the bad either. So they won't accept the fact that the reason that they know so much about their history is because much of the academics before them only decided that they were the only ones who were relevant, and nobody else was. Now to that other point, I think when people are talking about things like black or Asian pride or whatever, they may say that, but it's the same thing too. For example, a black American is not going to care about, and they're not going to think about Nigerians. They're not going to think about Afro Brazilians. Half the people that I talk to are probably not even aware that there are black people in Brazil, so they're not going to understand that. And so everybody says that, but they're still only thinking within the context of the the national boundaries that they inhabit. In the case of West Africa, especially, they're going to think in terms of ethnic groups. They're not so. Yeah, it may be Nigerian, but if this person is Nigerian, but he's from the north, well, those are the Muslims, and I'm not going to be proud of that because I don't like them. But
Right.
if or vice versa, or they can say, well, that person's from the river states, and we don't like the river states, and so we're not going to take pride in that because those people we don't like them. Though those are basically people that are poor, they can't do anything, but they have a lot of natural resources, aka oil.
So,
And
so
so
this is sort of where I kind of have a problem with like the whole pride thing versus racism, and like as you were saying, nobody wants to take the bad, they just want the
Right.
good. I
And
think that's a big problem
another good example
in
that I
general.
think a lot of people here can understand or identify more with um, is the Japanese, for example. They're very nationalistic, and so just because a Japanese person is with a Chinese person, that doesn't mean they're going to like each other. And especially if it's Japanese and Korean, the Japanese person may, I mean, they have Koreans who live in Japan and they've been born and raised there, but they still see them
Still
as
really aren't
Korean.
like accepted. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um, what I was gonna say was this is like where I kind of have an issue with the whole race thing and trying to be like, well, this here's the good things, but nobody. It makes it difficult because it's like if you are acknowledging that there are good things about race, then just by extension of that, you kind of have to accept that there's bad things too. And I know that that gets into like really, really rocky territory where it's really easy to fall into like the racist talking points or have racist beliefs about people. But it's like, if that's the case, then it's like you can't just have it one way. You can't just say there's good things about a race and then just be like, well, anything that bad that's said is just automatically racism. And I'm not advocating by any means. I don't want anybody to misunderstand. I'm not advocating by any means to try to say like a specific race is lesser simply because of their race. It's just that I think it mostly comes down to the culture that they're raised in. It's not
yeah,
really, yeah, it's not really something that's like intrinsic to their birth. And I think that those two things kind of get conflated with each other. And it leads to people holding those kind of beliefs that like, well, it's just because this person has this skin color or looks this way that they are this way.
right. The kind of they're doomed to what they are because they look this way.
But I mean, then you can easily defeat that example by just finding that one person that like, all right, maybe there's a kid that was born in China and they were adopted to a Western family, and there's no specific reason that I chose China, but they would be Americanized. They wouldn't have any of the cultural values that a Chinese person in China would have,
I mean, unless
unless
their
they were
parents,
raised by a Chinese family, like in Chinatown.
yeah, or their parents tried really hard to make sure their adoptive parents tried hard to make sure that they did.
Right, right. Which I mean, I don't know how often that happens, but just on an extremely general example level, that's a situation where you could find somebody that they look a certain way, but they don't fit the way that you would expect them to just by looking at them.
And I think people don't recognize that very often. With a lot of different people, it's like, well, somebody may ethnically or ancestrally be this, but they were born and raised in America, and therefore that's the value system that they hold.
Right. And obviously, you can get into the whole thing with people that are willing to assimilate versus those that are unwilling to assimilate, but that's like an entirely different
And
discussion.
whether or not they should, because that I feel like as a kid and my more social justice upbringing, I feel like the argument is that they should not have to assimilate.
I think it's like there needs to be a middle ground. It really depends on like where they come from and how. And I don't think this just goes for coming to the West. It goes for anywhere you go in the world, depending on where you're from. It's like how, because a person, for example, that I guess maybe that would come from might have an easier time assimilate, even though there are differences between Europe and America. I think there's enough similarities where one could more easily assimilate versus, somebody coming from the Middle East. I don't think somebody should have to give up the entirety of their identity to move somewhere, but at the same time, you kind of have to compromise a reasonable amount.
And I think a lot of people have a problem. They don't know how to handle that. And because I remember, I know this sounds stupid, but I remember taking a Coursera class in Portuguese on I can't remember what it was called. It was like pluralities of Brazilian society or something. And there was a lot of that going on. In fact, one of the professors, they interviewed a professor, but then they also had other professors who were basically, I mean, they're all Brazilian by nationality, but one, for example, was she moved to Brazil when she was about 6 or 7 from Japan. And so her parents still are Japanese for all intents and purposes. While she felt, she would talk about how she had a difficult time adjusting and deciding what her own personal identity was, because she still had that Japanese piece, but she also had the Brazilian piece enough to where she would use a more Brazilian or more Portuguese name around some, and then I think she eventually just started using her Japanese name, because the one of the problems she has is that her name and many Japanese girl names end in ko, child, and but in Portuguese, if something ends in o, the default assumption is to assume that the gender of that noun is masculine. So
assuming genders, that's getting into problematic territory there.
Well, it's Brazil, so it's always going to be problematic. And so she would say that she had that problem where people would say something about her name, so she would use a different name so that they would stop talking about that.
I could see where something like that would be slightly obnoxious.
But at the same time, she also said that when she had her child or her daughter and things, she would make sure that her daughter could speak Japanese and spend time with her grandparents so that she could understand the Japanese culture. So it's hard for people to assimilate.
Yeah, and I don't, like I said, I don't think there's anything wrong with trying to preserve your way of life to an extent. I think what's weird to me is when you have somebody that is leaving a country and they go to a country that has extremely different values, and then it's like, they're obviously leaving their country for a reason, and then they come over and they want to make the country that they come to like the country that they left. I guess that could boil down to they realize that moving to whatever country they chose will give them more economic opportunities rather than being about wanting to escape their culture. So it's kind of confusing. I feel like a lot of people really just have it like one way or the other. But I wouldn't imagine, I just couldn't imagine moving somewhere and like trying to impose my own individual value on everybody around me.
Well, nowadays that's a pretty common thing to do. Everybody wants to impose their own personality on others and kind of guilt them into accommodating it.
Well, because the ultimate argument now is it's about showing people kindness and compassion while completely disregarding the extending that same courtesy to somebody else, and not trying your best to compromise with someone and not completely impose on them, and think about, hey, I'm not the only person in the world. Other people have feelings as well, and so if I expect people to worry about my feelings, then I need to some extent worry about theirs. But
Yeah.
they get these excuses in their head where it's like, well, I identify in this way, and therefore I'm this level of oppressed, and therefore your feelings don't matter and compared to my feelings, and it's all very convenient for them, but it's never there's never any need to show kindness to the opposition. And I don't like that. That's why I don't play the stupid label game. It's like, I don't care what you think you are or what you are or how oppressed you've been. If I'm not the one actively doing those things to you, then, you know, you're not going to take that out on me. And if that's going to net me some kind of negative label from you, well, you're probably just going to be someone I'm not going to interact with. I don't think it's fair to try to change other people's behavior based on your subjective interpretation of reality.
Hashtag deal with it, bro.
Pretty much. What am I getting notifications for? Oh boy. Hey, it's the ever popular gender fluid is bullshit video. Let's read the comment while we're here. Can you even read? Gender and sex are different. One is social and the other is biological. And guess what? You're wrong. Because your generation didn't have this knowledge, many adults don't even know that they are gender fluid, trans, etc. And if they do now, they honestly can't do anything about it because they have unsupportive families and friends who don't give shits.
Well, they're right about that second part, but not for the reasons they think. And how do they know? See, that's one thing that bothers me about a lot of those comments. How do you know that they don't know? So what it sounds like they're trying to say is they are trying to redefine it, and then now they are trying to impose their definition.
Since they've redefined it, it would make those people be categorized as gender fluid or trans.
Right. When back in my day, it was called having a personality.
Right. I mean, because we've touched on this so many times before that gender at this point now just means personality, because everybody can have their own individual gender. You know, gender is about how you feel, that's not what it was about. And now it's really a conflicted argument between these people because they're just not consistent. They say, well, it's a social construct. It's like, well, okay, it's a social construct, but then how are you going to claim that it's this intrinsic part of your identity that you can't change, and therefore that's why we need legal protection for it? Because if it's a social construct, it's something that you've learned, and if you've learned it, you can unlearn those behaviors if you're trying to free yourself of social constructs.
Assuming they really are. Because I feel like that's just what they say, but not entirely true.
Oh, as a side note, but do you have any opinions on MGTOW or plan to make a video on it? I understand it, but I don't think I could go that far. I actually do have a video on it already, but it's really, it's really just a video where I collected a bunch of extreme comments and kind of ragged on them. And then at the end of the video, if you listen that far, I kind of clarify my position on it. So a lot of people got mad. Fine, whatever. It's nothing new to me. But I feel like they didn't wait and they just thought like, oh, there's this guy picking on our label, and
time to run to its defense.
Therefore, we need to call him a white knight and all this other stupid stuff that doesn't really apply. Because, if you took the time to listen to it, you would see that the comments that I chose were very stupid, and I really don't know how you could defend them. It's like my opinion overall about the MGTOW thing isn't really positive. I feel like if you're not interested in relationships and you're just, for whatever reason, you're not interested in being with a woman, fine, whatever. But I guess I just don't see the need to go around wearing this label saying I'm going my own way when you could just be living that lifestyle. And, they say they're all about focusing on themselves and stuff. And yet all I ever see in the comment sections is like, yeah, these women, they just try to trap you and take your money and blah, blah, blah. I feel like
they don't have that paycheck.
Right. So I feel like this is what I feel like. I feel like the people that take on the MGTOW label are not the actual people that live the lifestyle that they claim to be living. Because I feel like the people that are actually living that lifestyle are too busy doing their own thing to be talking about, how terrible it is to be with women and stuff like that.
They certainly wouldn't be
It seems
knee-jerk reactionaries
counterproductive.
over it.
Yeah, it seems counterproductive, and it seems very cultish. Like, if you'll go to my comment section and you'll see a ton of people that have the label in their username. It's weird. It's weird to me.
Yeah,
I
I
don't
don't.
think that,
Yeah,
for as many bad relationship experiences as I've had myself, I just can't see myself like writing it off because people ultimately, in my view, people are individuals, and no matter what, you're always going to find good and bad in your groups. There's good men, there's good women, there's bad men, there's bad women. I feel like they make it into something that it's not by making oversimplifications and extreme generalizations. People do shitty things to each other in relationships sometimes. You can't avoid that. It's part of life. And really the only way to avoid it, I guess, is to not be involved in relationships. But for people who aren't involved in relationships, they sure discuss them a lot.
they're really hung up on it, which to me just tells me that they're not serious because, like you said, I made a comment on that video saying that based on their definition, then you could have said that I was at one point in time because I had that mentality. I didn't hate women, even though, trust me, I the whole if you don't do this, you're a misogynist thing isn't new. I got it like 12 years ago for simply just saying, no, I'm not going to chase after anybody right now, and it just doesn't seem like the right thing to do because there are obviously problems with myself that I have, and there are also interpersonal issues, and I'm just not going to deal with that right now. I'm going to focus on the personal and then the interpersonal. I'm going to focus on the things that I can change in myself and not get caught up in the other stuff. But I didn't go around telling everybody
Right. I
that.
think a lot of the time, if you're focusing on yourself, you're actually doing stuff. You're not posturing about it on some stupid comment section. You don't feel and I've said this about a lot of groups. If you're actually doing what you go around bragging about, usually you don't feel the need to brag. It's like the guys that go around bragging about how big their dick is, or the guys that go around bragging about how much sex they have. Most of the time, those people, they're not doing that as much as they say they are. Because the people that actually do are too busy doing it to sit around talking about it.
I can think of some YouTubers that do that a lot. I'm
Yeah.
sure they'll say they're just playing a personality, but they really do talk about it. A lot of internet personalities talk about it, and it's like, okay, well, sure, whatever. I get it. You're trying to make it sound like you have lots of sex, and yeah,
And the
okay.
people that came out against my video on that, they really just, once again, they oversimplified it and made it seem like, well, why do you hate men that don't want relationships? It's like, first of all, show me where I said that. And second, I don't hate them. It's the part where I don't even have a problem with people that don't want to be in a relationship. The problem I have is when, they're so outspoken about it, and they're not, much like the people that I speak to on Twitter that just want to block. They're just not open to hearing anything else that doesn't fit with their idea of reality. You can give them all the counterexamples in the world, and all they'll ever do is point to stupid things like the marriage statistics and yada yada, without paying attention to the reasons why those stats are as high as they are. It's like, well, most women initiate the divorces. It's like, okay, but why are they initiating it?
And
Was there infidelity? Was there, like, what is the reason? You can't just use that, throw that statistic out there with no context and just make it look like the women just randomly decided to get a divorce for no reason.
they usually, I mean, a lot of people go into marriage with these very naive mentalities, and they don't understand what it takes, and they don't look at it like any other interpersonal relationship. It's not, well, I mean, nowadays people lose friendships over who they voted for. So I mean, it's trickled down already, but you can't. A lot of people go into there. That's why I hated the whole "love is love" hashtag, because it's like
Oh
that.
God.
It's meaningless verbiage. It doesn't tell you anything. And if you go in believing that love is what you need, one, you need to talk about what kind of love are we even talking about here, because if it's a different kind and you go into a marriage like that, may not work out. But the other problem is that I see a lot of people, they should be getting married in the first place, and I think that's why a lot of the divorces happen. But nobody ever just wants to say, I don't think I'm mature enough for it. So on paper, the idea of MGTOW sounds like a great idea, because you can, if you focus on yourself, you can then decide if you're mature enough or not for
Right.
it. But because they've automatically decided, because they're this, they are now automatically not sufficient for it, or they cannot deal with it. And now it's a bad thing. But it shouldn't be that. It should be you deciding whether or not you're mature enough for it. And I've seen some people in those comments even say, well, we just didn't get married and we don't believe in marriage, but we're gonna just stay in a long-term relationship, which to me is asinine.
I was
One,
gonna
you're
say
doing
it's really the same thing,
you're,
and
you're deluding yourself. If a formality, if a piece of paper is what determines how successful your relationship is
right.
going to be, you're immature. You're so immature, you shouldn't be in the relationship you're in.
Well, you're right, because that would go both ways. You got the people that are saying, well, we don't need a piece of paper to express our love or whatever, which, all right, there's some truth to that. But then, like you just said, that's also another good point. If the actual getting the paper is what destroys your relationship, it couldn't have been that strong in the first place. So that really goes both ways. And I don't think a lot of them just don't see it that way.
Right, and I think people don't really have. I mean, there's not really anybody that has a lot of good examples, and I mean the way people are when it comes to marriage. It's so taboo to talk about problems in it. So nobody's ever going to say, I'm having this problem, or I don't know. And it can be a minor problem, or it can be fairly innocuous by comparison. But nobody knows how to deal with it. And the reality of the matter is that a lot of times I see the signs that something's not going to work, but people still go into it anyway, and then it doesn't
I've
work
been
out.
I've been in the situation where I've seen the signs and I've still gone forward with it. So I mean, it happens.
I mean, and a lot of people do it for, I mean, they do it for good reasons. They're trying to be a good person and thinking, oh, the person's not going to always be this way, they're going to get better. But it we I'm not saying a marriage is a job, but you have to treat it with the same kind of cynicism you treat with a corporate job.
I mean, it definitely takes work to say that a relationship is just all fun and games. I mean, that's not even true. There's good and bad, and you have to decide how much you're willing to take, and how much the other person is actually working with you versus how much they're just thinking of themselves. I mean, you have to be on the same page. You really just have to be on the same wavelength and be open to communicating with each other and compromising. And it's a constant effort. And I think that people that just try to pretend it's all happiness all the time is just stupid, because they just set themselves up for disappointment. And isn't happiness all the time doesn't mean it's a bad thing. I mean, being able to deal with emotional hardship it's a character builder. It teaches you a lot of things, and I hate that it's come to this point where it's like, well, you're not fulfilling all of my needs at all times, therefore I'm just going to find someone new who will, in the short term, fulfill those needs according to my delusions. And then, of course, eventually I will discover they don't do that either. So I'll just be in this endless cycle of moving on to the next one and the next one and the next one. Or
And
they just get to this stupid point where they're like, they get completely hedonistic and say, well, since one person can never fulfill all of my needs, I decided that I need multiple partners, and we can have this polyamorous thing, and I can claim that it's another sexuality because I wasn't born to be monogamous. And it's like, all right, now you're just making shit up so that nobody can say anything about your lifestyle by claiming it's a sexuality and putting it under this same thing as, you know, being gay or being straight. It's not even remotely the same thing, and it really just aggravates me to no end. I should probably do some kind of video on that at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I think what happens is that people, for one, they see a lot of divorces. They probably grew up in families that are like that, or they're just seen it a lot. But now the prevalence of it. So, you know, there used to be a time century ago when there's really only one state where you could just get a divorce and nobody was at fault. And but now that it's spread to all the states and it's spread to so many other countries,
and
it makes it easy, and it almost incentivizes people to just say, well,
yeah,
when
to
things
just
get
give up
tough,
and throw in the
yeah.
towel, because it's like that's pushed as the norm now. And when people speak about that, you always see them point to the most extreme examples. It's always like, well, you know, back in the 50s, well, people didn't get divorced, but that also means people stayed in relationships where they got beat up. And it's like, okay, yeah, that's true. Some people obviously did, but you're painting that as the majority rather than, you know, just some of the cases.
And another thing I've seen is then people just get complacent and they just say, oh well, you know, this person's not going to change, or the situation's not going to change, so I'm just going to settle, and I'm not going to try to fix the marriage. I'm not going to try to address the problems.
And then, of course, that leads to more foolish behavior where someone will step outside of the marriage without actually just ending the relationship first, which I feel like if you're going to give up, you might as well just end the relationship. I wouldn't want to see people get divorced so much, but if you're really just not going to work on it at all, then there's no sense in continuing just for the sake of it.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I see a lot of different issues there, and it's never going to be perfect. But yes, if the way I look at it is that if you can't make yourself happy all the time, why would you expect anybody else to be able to make you happier than you could ever make yourself?
I mean, that's true. I hate to do the as someone, but speaking from the perspective of a person that has a hard time keeping a decent level of personal happiness, it's unrealistic to expect someone else to be your sole provider of happiness, because you know you do have to be able to make yourself happy on some level. And being in a healthy relationship can obviously do wonders for your outlook, but at the same time it can't be everything, because there's going to be times where that person is not making you happy, and maybe it's not even in a malicious way.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it could be that just nobody's making you happy, and or I mean that's the problem. There's not a lot of, for all of this focus on hedonism and oh, you're the self is the most important part of any individual, or the individual self is the most important thing. A lot of There's no introspection. I
Yeah.
don't see a lot of people reflecting inward and thinking, oh well, yeah, this is a problem, or this is the issue that I see within myself that I have, or I just don't see any of that.
I feel like that could be just an entire stream in and of itself. But we are coming up, I think, on hour and a half, so that's probably a good spot to end it. Most people don't watch these streams after the fact if they're super long. I always say this, but we will try to come back before another month. Maybe if if any of you guys send like topic suggestions or something, we might be able to take that into account, because some of the times it's not just that we don't want to stream or whatever, but it's just you need something good to talk about to keep the conversation going. And a lot of the times I go into this half-assed and really just have like one or two things to talk about, and then the discussion branches out from there. But it's always good to come into it with something rather than just completely winging it.
Yeah. No,
But we will be back. And appreciate everybody listening and interacting in the chat. I'm glad it was actually a pretty decent and relaxed chat this time around. Usually YouTube chats are cancerous, so I'm happy to say that it was good. Thanks everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.